Hello, 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 and welcome to an integrated approach. This is Dion Brown, licensed therapist here in Maryland and DC, self care expert, mental health and wellness speaker, and ordained associate pastor. I am here as we are moving forward tonight to talk about trauma, mental health, and spirituality, how that affects and impacts our wellness. We focus in on self care as well, helping individuals, companies, staff members, teams, and groups to enhance and improve their own self care through practical tools and tips, such as the Self Care Core 4, as well as the integration of mental health and spirituality. We want to welcome all of our guests that are viewing with us live, as well as those of you that will be tuning in for the replay after. We are excited tonight to have with us a colleague, special guest tonight in the person of Mr. Clifton Bright. Now, we're going to bring him in a little bit, but as we go forward tonight, we're going to talk about trauma, mental health, spirituality, and we're going to look at that in the context of making some references from the recent Kirk Franklin documentary. I'm just going to share with you all a few things about our guest before we bring him in and before we get started. Clifton Bright is a licensed clinical professional counselor, mentor, life coach, and consultant and author located in Howard County, Maryland. He's worked with men from all walks of life and has discovered that God has a specific purpose for every man. His passion is to help men strengthen their knowledge of their identity so they can function in their purpose. He's been married for 18 years and has three wonderful children. He's a member of the Spirit of Faith Christian Center in Baltimore, Maryland, where he serves as an usher. He has also founded the Bright House Counseling and Coaching, his own private practice, providing mental health and life coaching services, focusing on helping men to heal families, communities, and nations. So we want to welcome Mr. Clifton Bright.
Thanks for
Hello,
having
sir.
me, Dale. How are you, sir?
I am doing well this evening. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. The Eagles won today, so
The Eagles won. Okay. So I'm pretty sure that you are excited and happy about that, the fact that they won.
yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Good. So we're gonna definitely dive in and talk about a lot of things, in reference to trauma and what that looks like. And a lot of times people may hear this word, trauma circulating around, and they're not exactly sure, what it means, as well as what it might look like, because for many years people have only thought about trauma in the context of like war and
Mhm.
combat soldiers, etc. But I want to just mention a few things concerning trauma as we dive in. Trauma really has to do with a psychological response to an event or a series of events that can cause physical, emotional, and or mental harm. The effects of trauma can be short term or long term, and the severity can depend. Now, typically, there's three different types of trauma. We have the acute trauma, and that has to deal with trauma that occurs in reference to like a single, highly stressful event. Then we might have chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is a response to an ongoing or repetitive traumatic experiences that people deal with over and over again. It differs from acute trauma in the sense that an acute trauma occurs just after one traumatic event or experience. But the chronic trauma may be something that happens with people over and over again in a lot of ways and in a lot of capacities. And then lastly, we have complex trauma. Complex trauma is a type of trauma and stress that can occur where a person is experiencing multiple chronic or prolonged exposures to traumatic events. So, as we go forward this evening to talk about our referencing this Kirk Franklin documentary, it's going to be a lot for us to consider when we look at trauma and its effects. So again, so just want to thank you and welcome you to for being here, with us tonight as we really go forward to talk about these items. So
Yes, sir. It's an honor.
absolutely. Now, was there anything extra that you wanted to add before we jump into any of the definition that I've given for trauma, or do you think that suffices?
That's it suffices. The only thing I would maybe add as well is oftentimes people get stuck on trauma being the event, right? One of the best things I've heard with a clinician describing trauma was that trauma is the wound that's left
Ah,
from what happened to you. So, for instance, I don't know if you remember, I always use this with clients to kind of simplify it. You remember the earthquake we had in Maryland years ago?
yes, sir.
And because we're not used to having earthquakes here in Maryland, if you ask a lot of people, they'll be able to tell you exactly where they were, uh, you know, what it felt like to them in some cases, what was going on. Like for me, I was working at a community behavioral health practice at the time, talking to my supervisor, and the ground started shaking.
Wow.
So like people in multiple offices were jumping under the table and everything. My supervisor's like, "What's that?" I was like, "Yeah, that's probably an earthquake." So it passed by. It wasn't even in Maryland. It was somewhere in Virginia, but we were just feeling kind of the aftershocks of it. Now, if you take somebody that's from California who may have experienced earthquakes various times, they may not have that same response as you and I may have had, where some people were like, I don't want to go outside anymore.
Yep.
What if we have a bigger earthquake? Are we sitting on fault lines? Uh, are we going to have ones that are of more intensity where that person may be like, that's nothing. So we may have this same experience, but it may leave a wound on me that it doesn't leave on the other person. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's like I react or I have sensations based on how it impacted me, what it was left, and how it shifted, even how I react and respond to things. So I would add that as well.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So we mentioned that we're going to be tapping into the Kirk Franklin documentary and looking at things with that. And those of you that are tuning in, please feel free to ask a question or comment, and we'll be able to see your comment or question and post it and talk about that. So, when we talk about trauma, the impact of our early childhood experiences has a profound effect on our environment later in life and how we see things. One of the things that I noticed from the documentary right away was that, Kirk Franklin mentioned at the beginning that he was adopted, raised alone, and didn't have any memories of his birthday. So that already is, in the context of our Western world, that already is pretty abnormal and traumatic for a kid.
Mhm.
And that can definitely cause a child, as they're growing and developing, already to start to have some self-esteem, self-confidence, worth issues, et cetera, et cetera. So we see early in the documentary that he was growing up already with some challenging circumstances. So do you remember hearing that part?
I do. I remember hearing that. And the part that stuck out the most when he was describing that was, well, it was two things. He said there was never a time he was not made fully aware that he was adopted.
Mm.
So, in some cases, you have children that are adopted, they don't even find out until later on in life because the family that may adopt them wants to normalize the living situation for them, wants to make it feel inclusive. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Where it's like, this is family for me. I feel safe here. I feel like I belong. I feel like I matter. But to hear him say there was really never a time he was not aware that he was adopted stuck with me. Almost like imagining every day you're told you're not really a part of this. You're just here.
Mm.
And him saying a distant relative is the one that adopted him. That part stuck out. And also him mentioning the chronic loneliness from that.
Yes, sir.
always feeling alone. Uh, Later on, he talks about some of the effects of that growing up. But to hear those parts, you could hear the wound, and you can kind of see how that plays a part in who he is today and who he's been, historically over the years as we've seen him, because he's a public figure.
He is.
So unlike you and I, his life is often on display. You know,
Yeah.
so
And you're right. And with that early childhood rejection for Kirk Franklin of being traumatic, more trauma, right? Early childhood rejection of being abandoned by his mother, his biological mother. And as he noted, having to see her a few times a year and
mhm,
the scar, right? The scar of rejection.
exactly.
It was incredibly powerful. That's the scar of rejection of him not being able to go with his biological mother.
Mhm,
So unfortunately, here was the beginning stages of him of just early childhood trauma after trauma, growing up with the knowledge, somebody constantly giving him the message from somewhere, or the early childhood messaging that you are adopted. And then him having to deal with the rejection, Kirk Franklin having to deal with the rejection of his mother, his biological mother, who he would see regularly, not taking him, and the so here was the development of, we work with a lot of people in our practice who sometimes they're 40 and 50 maybe when they come into therapy and they're working through their stuff, and a lot of times they are struggling to deal with messaging, right, and
mhm,
early childhood messaging that they receive. So here was Kirk Franklin receiving a very powerful message early, the very powerful message early of, I'm not good enough.
exactly.
I'm not good enough. So
Exactly.
so unfortunately the foundation was already laid.
Yep. I'm
Yeah.
not good enough. I don't belong. Also, having that wound covered and ripped at least twice a year, right? Because that's how he described. I would see her twice a year, and he would remember when she left. How come I can't go with you? You know. So it's like you're giving me a taste of you, but then you're pulling it away. So things don't stick.
No.
You know. And yeah, and when you talk about, a lot of times we talk about early childhood experiences, and how that affects how you attach, right? So you think about like attachment styles. For instance, like an anxious attachment style, right? Where you're
Yep.
always looking to perform because there's this chronic fear or worry that this attachment is going to end. They're going to choose better than you. You always have to show up at this high level way, and you have to do everything right, and you never feel comfortable and safe. So I can imagine, you know, even as he aged, how those visits would go, and how he would maybe structure in his mind how he has to even show up in that space.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Because maybe if I can do certain things, maybe you won't leave this time. You
Wow.
know, maybe so. Because when you have these traumatic experiences, right? So when they talk about trauma, they often talk about how you know trauma is not time based,
Mm-mm.
which is why you can have something, and we call them triggers. And for people that feel comfortable enough to say triggers, some people I say things that stir them up, because the word trigger is triggering. So we use different language and terminology, but they have certain things that stir things up in them, and they don't really have these time-based memories. Like you'll have something happen to you that registers as traumatic, but you can't always say exactly when it happened. You can't always say every detail of it, because it becomes more of what gets encoded in your brain is the sensations and the feelings of what you experience, rather than having the language and words to it, because that part of the brain gets cut off
Hmm.
when you're experiencing trauma, that thinking part of the brain. So oftentimes they deal with shame, because they're like, did what happened really happen?
Yep.
you know think about like family secrets, right? Because
Mm.
if we're talking about him, These are family secrets, you know.
Funny.
Yeah, these are family secrets. These are things that are kind of hidden.
Yep.
These are things that are touched from a far away place and not really connective and consistent. And when you have those things, a lot of times shame comes up because we don't really want to deal with what's transpired.
I
So
agree.
imagine as a kid, he's dealing with all of this
As a kid,
as a kid.
not fully developed yet mentally and emotionally, is just overall development. And I'm going to come back to something that you said concerning that, but we also see early, though, early, with all of that going on, with all of that abandonment and all that rejection and all of that trauma and
Mhm.
the deficits with Kirk Franklin from the documentary of Trauma, we also start to see God involvement in his life early, right? He
Right.
talks about his connection with
Mhm.
a little piano in the house and how his connection with music birthed basically his relationship with God, and how he would go. I think he said he would go up on the roof
He
and
would
just
go on the
talk,
roof. Mhm.
to God. So wow. So we start to see, even with we start to see, even in Trauma, I guess we may say, like the imagery might be like God sitting with him
Mhm.
in his
Mhm.
trauma. Early, right? Early,
Exactly. Early, you
early.
know.
I mean, little did we know, and little did he know that he would be the Kirk Franklin later.
Right.
But we start to see the hand of God sitting with him in his trauma. And again, if you're tuning in, we see some more people came on to the broadcast. Feel free to make a comment or question, and we'll address it while we're live here on the broadcast. You can just type in your comment or question, particularly if you're on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll aim to check it out and respond to it. Now, one of the things was that he had to deal with. He had this estranged relationship with his mother. He
Mhm.
had not talked with her for about 20 years, right?
Mhm.
Which is like, we're like, how does that happen?
Right.
But he goes on to talk about the irony and orchestration of a funeral, right? And a random moment in time conversation at a funeral, that there was talk going around at this funeral about a guy named Rick who might be his biological dad. So look, we know that early childhood development greatly affects and impacts our adult life and later in life, how we think, feel, function, etc. Here he is already having a strange relationship with his mother, and there's confusion about
Mhm.
who his biological father is. And then there's whispers of this funeral of this person who might be his actual biological father. Now, you work with men a lot.
I
I
do.
do work with men, but I know you really focus your work, a lot of your work with men as well. Um, what do you what do you think would go on in most men if they're not clear who their biological father is, and they start to hear whispers all of a sudden that they've been traumatized by that? We both, wow, I just thought about it. We both have definitely dealt with a number of males in our practice who had father issues,
Right.
various types of dad issues. Dad
Mhm.
absent, dad not around, dad treated me bad, dad gave me bad. But he didn't really have a father to grow up with. But now he's starting to hear whispers. Okay, this person might be your biological father. What in the world do you think might have gone on inside of him?
Well, I think for him, and if you think about most men, because you never want to deal with absolutes because we all respond to things differently.
Hmm.
Uh, that piece too, with him thinking that this other man was his biological father and him passing in 2020, right? And him,
Yep.
visiting him right before he passed and telling him how much he wanted to be his son and how much he needed him, and saying he got the response from this man he thought was his father that he was like, mm-hmm. And then he passed. He was, probably, somewhere between – do I want to have hope? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I'm hearing these rumors. Do I want to have hope? Because as far as I know, my biological father has already passed away, and I didn't have a relationship with him. And also him talking about hating his biological father. I don't know if you had caught that part, that he hated this man for so long
I did.
because he didn't give him what he wanted.
Mhm.
So depending on the messaging a man has inside of him, as far as his identity, because sometimes when we don't get what we need, we may tell ourselves we don't need it. I'm okay. I don't really need this. And I think what makes this so powerful is, was he 11-time Grammy winner?
Absolutely.
Uh, like I said, not Oprah household name, but really high and influential in gospel circles and also in mainstream music because of all the collaborations he's had.
Yeah.
So you have
Absolutely.
this big time artist, you have all these accolades, you know, but still you have this part of him that longs for that.
Yep. We got a comment. Dr. Paradise Watson said so much variation and depending on environment,
Mhm.
social supports, social emotional development, and stages of life. Yes, sir. In
Mhm.
most cases, the anger and pain triumphs the choice to forgive and embrace.
That is true.
Yeah, it
You know,
is. That
that
is
is
the case
true.
in most cases for sure.
You know, because it's like he's hurt me too much. And especially using the anger to hide the pain.
Yep.
Because a lot of times showing the pain can be seen as vulnerability, and that vulnerability for a lot of us as men is seen as weakness. You know, I'm not gonna show that this bothered me. You know, so I would say his emotions were conflicted. I think most men in that space would be conflicted, but to see him willing to step out, and also to see uh, what Rick did later on. I'm not trying to jump ahead,
You're
but
fine.
seeing what he did later on spoke volumes uh, to that embracing and forgiving and showing up in a space to possibly give somebody what they need, which
Indeed.
was really impactful.
Yep. And I'm gonna come back to the father for a moment, but I want to mention for a moment the mother. Just continual trauma again. There was a pervasive history of his biological mother lying to him,
Mm-hmm.
and issues of trust, pervasive distrust. And we unfortunately, we see early, her mentioning that whatever is going on, she'll tell him the truth.
Right.
But no, it's presents very terribly because she's not open and honest and authentic. So he has, so no wonder, he's struggling with, he shares with us, and the way he incorporates his musical development, and this I'm sure this album is going to be, tremendous.
Right.
With the way he integrates that, with his pain and his struggle, but he has a pattern of his biological mother just not being truthful with him at all, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and just denying the truth. Um, so here is this random stranger, Rick. They do the DNA test based upon the rumors. He gets the swabs done, receives the phone call, and here is this confirming moment that this is your father. I'm gonna chime in, but can you speak to the multiplicity of emotions he probably felt at that time he received the confirming phone call that this man is your biological father?
Well, the ones that were on display the most in his presentation in the documentary was anger, you know, hope. You can see the hope that was springing in him, that my biological father is still alive and he's actually there. But he also goes to, and he clearly stated, I need to process my mother lying to me again. You
Hmm.
know, him needing to process that
Yeah.
because, you know, getting that DNA evidence, it's in your face, right? We're not just dealing with speculation. We're dealing with scientific fact. So you see him getting overwhelmed as well,
Yes, sir.
as he repeatedly says, what, 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 and then him saying, I gotta go because I gotta process this. So he's feeling it's probably a bunch of emotions going on.
Oh yeah.
Some hope, some joy, some anger, which was very evident. Uh, Probably feeling betrayed once again from his biological mother, and just probably feeling a lot of confusion as well. Like what is this?
Mm-hmm.
What is true? What's not true? You know.
Well, and yes, and because he says at a point when we're going, what? My mother lied to me
Again.
again. So that's where we hone in and talk about what we mentioned earlier. That then he's starting to really deal with some more chronic trauma, just
Mhm.
just situation after situation, traumatic event after traumatic event. And I'm sure many people listening in the present or who will watch this later, you also would have felt a lot of different array of emotions if you're finding out that someone is your biological father for the first time, and he unfortunately processed that another man was his father, who he said, I hated him all these years, and then come to find out that that wasn't his father. So just a whole glob of trauma and traumatic effects that he was dealing with while he was on the road to becoming the great Kirk Franklin.
Exactly. Exactly. And speaking to, you know, because he mentioned getting to know who he is, because trauma can often strip you
Yep.
or hinder you from identifying who you are.
Mm,
So, because a lot of times, like I'll have men come into office initially when I first start meeting with them, and if we talk about identity,
yes.
I ask them, "Who are you?" They'll often mention what they do
How about that?
as who they are. So think about it. You know, uh, Him even having the line where he said, "I trade in all the awards I won
Yes,
just
sir.
to be somebody's son."
Oof.
That line impacted and hit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He's like, you can take all of the stuff, all of the accolades, all the prestige. I just want to be a son. I want to be loved, because those things, all those accomplishments, never brought him that.
Not at all.
The love and adoration of millions never brought him that, never filled that void. And as he said, I would trade all that just to have that. So imagine now thinking, hmm, do I have an opportunity for that?
Yep.
But also, like you said, also experiencing more pain from his relationship with his mother, and feeling like, once again, I've been lied to.
Yes. And and I'm putting it in the comment section in case anybody wants to look at it or chime in later, because he said, "How can I be the what was it, the best or the strongest gospel artist
Mhm,
at that time, at least, um, and not really know who he is?"
mhm,
He started when he was singing the song, I give up every trophy that I won just to be someone's son. And he became
mhm,
very emotional. So you just started seeing him really deal with the challenges and the trauma of that. How can I be the biggest selling gospel artist, but not have his father tell him who he was? And he says, I've been the most insecure man in the world. So that
mhm,
also shows us the correlation in the relationship your father and you have sons, plural.
Yeah, sons.
So right. So what is speak to that for a moment. We talking about trauma. The what do you see as the power of a wow? What do you see as the I was it just went here. What do you see as the power of a father to speak into the life of a son? I know.
I'm
No,
a measure. I'm a measure it before I go into it.
that's true.
It is immense, and here's the sense of it. So we have like Kurt Franklin's a good example.
Yeah.
We have many men who have went on to be extremely successful and have had great lives
Mm.
and have not had the presence of their father. They may have had other male influences that stepped in. Some of them, though, have not had any male influences, and kudos to their mothers and grandmothers and other people that stepped in. The power of a father, though, and what he can speak into you about manhood and your identity. Like if we injected spirituality into the mix, right? We integrated that. If you look at fathers, throughout the Bible, they spoke to their sons.
Mm-hmm.
They told them who they were. You know, uh, they told them who they could be. So if you think about being with a father every day, so if I was to be transparent, right?
Sure.
Even a conversation I was having with my son this morning on the way to service, because I usher and he ushers as well. So I made mention to him because he went to homecoming last night. I made mention to him that you are in such a different place than I was when I was 17 years old in terms of your self-esteem, your self-confidence, knowing who you are. I've seen him not cave in to peer pressure to try to fit in. And I correlated to the day-to-day telling him who he is and being there, not just being there for the highlights, but being there even for the low points.
Uh-huh.
And then knowing that every day he's here covering me. You know what I mean? And that doesn't have to just be tied into you being in the home. Because unfortunately we have some fathers who don't get the opportunity to be in the same home as their children for various reasons.
True.
But you still have the power to speak into their lives and tell them who they are before the other voices get to them. You know what I mean? Because you think about it. You have various voices coming at males on a regular basis, on a daily basis.
Facts.
Coming from all different angles. You know what I mean? So the questions that male may be asking himself as he develops, having his father there to bring those things to, it gives it it comes from a different vein than what you would get from your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Not to diminish it, but to talk about the complementary pieces. Because we often want to talk about one greater than the other instead of talking about how both our roles are equal yet complementary. You know what I mean? But I know most of the men I talk to, and even if I'm talking about myself personally, we long to hear our fathers tell us that we're good enough men, that I'm doing well.
Yep, powerful.
That I'm successful. And a lot of times that's what drives us to do a lot of the things that we do. Whether in a way where it seems negative, but also even men that are high driven towards success are often looking for that. Like my own biological father, I told him, and I wrote it in the journal I wrote years ago. And, he told me last year he was reading it every month for the whole year.
Wow.
But there's a part in there where I said, I waited 38 years for my dad to tell me I was a good man. And when he finally said it, I cried like a baby. My eyes watered a little bit in front of him, but when I got out of his space, I cried like a baby because I had been waiting decades to hear that.
Powerful.
I wanted that validation. So I often think, and when I talk to fathers about their children, right, I often tell them, instead of coming at them saying, you're not doing this, because they deal with a lot of judgment, a
Hmm.
lot of shame, a lot of guilt when they're not as involved as they may want to be, or what people may believe they should be. I I often point to them the privilege of what you're missing out on. Not what
Absolutely.
you're not doing, but the privilege that you're missing out on. The privilege to shift what we talk about with a lot of generational trauma, because we haven't really hit it yet with Kirk Franklin, but you look at the absence of the biological father for him
Hmm.
and his relationship uh, with his son,
Yeah.
that they had that experience a couple of years ago, that,
Yep.
unlike a lot of us that may have those situations behind closed doors, gets
Mm,
put out in front of the whole world,
it does.
and goes viral. You see those generational traumatic experiences happening. Here's the thing, though. One generation can shift the trajectory of the generations that come up after it.
Hmm. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because with his, we see a definite parallel process, with Kirk Franklin and his relationship with his father, and then the issues with him and his son, which we'll delve into a little bit more in a bit. But just his courage and boldness to go to this man and meet him and share with his share with his biological father the results. Got a comment. Let me share. There we go. Fathers teach sons how to regulate emotions and provide a frame for young men to assume their own identity, whether they're modeling or instruction. So much to unpack and discuss here. True.
True.
So, with that in mind, Kirk Franklin never had anyone, father wise, to teach him how to regulate his emotions. What I do like is that, which I loved when I heard, he made reference to he said, he's been working with his own therapist, and he said, somebody's going to call him, even if he has to show up in his drawers. I'm going to need
Exactly.
him here.
I need him here tomorrow.
Right. So that is awesome, right? That he made. So you can be a popular gospel music icon, but that doesn't mean that you don't have issues that might need to get worked out in therapy.
Right.
So he embraced and endorsed therapy, in spite of who he was. He made a recognition that, hey, I am Kirk Franklin to all of you all, but I have another comment. I have all, but I'm Kirk Franklin to all of you all, but I have my own history, pervasive pattern of trauma I'm working through. It's affected me, impacting my present life, me and my relationship with his son. We see, therapists, we see the process of how this could happen. We also see how distant him and his father could be. And I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but it's okay. We got a few comments coming in. All right, so I'm going to put these up. So why do you think when those words are spoken to some young men by their father as an adult, it's not accepted that way? Do they feel there's ever a time of it being too late to feel? Whew.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
you're you're the father on the broadcast. I'll let you.
Well, it's definitely based on the individual. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that it's never too late if you look at it in the broad context. But what if I say it's too late? What if I've written it off? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, and you can remind me, I'm trying to remember if he ever said he forgave who he thought his biological father was. I'm trying to remember if I
Yeah,
said that.
I don't remember those words. I do remember him saying, I've been angry at him, and he went to his grave with me being angry with him
Right.
because I thought but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if he used those exact words, but I do remember him saying that part.
Right. So, and speaking to the question, for that young man in that context, I think you also have to look at when those words are spoken, what may have occurred beforehand.
Yeah.
Has there been a framework or a foundation? Uh, like Mr. Watson had talked about, right? That framework for a young man to develop his own identity. and to learn how to regulate his emotions. What was the framework and the context? How much, how many things needed to be unpacked? You know what I mean? Were the words believed, you know,
Yep.
by that young man when they heard it? So there is, from an overarching theme, there never is a time where it's too late.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes it depends on, for the individual, how much has occurred.
True.
You know, how deep are the wounds?
Yep.
What supports do they have? How willing are they in that space? Because they might not be willing in that space at that time to hear those words. I don't believe the father should not speak those words. You know, because I
Yep.
believe that is part of his responsibility and an act of his love to speak those words. But as we often tell clients, we don't control how somebody else feels.
True.
You know.
Thank you, Vandella Hayes, for that question. Ricardo, I'm coming to you. I see your question, but I'm going to post what Dr. Watson said because it's tied into Vandella Hayes' question first. He said he's reminded of Tupac's lyric, "He passed away and I didn't cry because my anger wouldn't let me feel for a stranger."
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. I get it. Now, you're welcome, Vandella. Ricardo states so. After the video came out, what Ricardo was referring to, there was some people that were angry and irritated with the biological father for some reason. And he said, so this is what his question is about. He says, I don't understand the anger directed at his father, who had no idea he existed when his mother was the cause. Oh, yes, she was, right. And
Mm-hmm.
continued to deny the DNA testing. Excellent question, sir. I definitely agree with that. But there have been some people in the community that were irritated and outraged for some reason with Rick, but he didn't know. There was
Right.
nothing he knew. So you're right. Did
Yeah.
you did you want to add to that?
Man, and you don't, we can't speak to why others feel that way. You know. Yeah, I personally wouldn't understand it either. Maybe it was the proximity of where Rick was, because when he said, my son used to play at a house that was like across the street from where Rick lives, and how I do music in the same city that Rick was in, you know? So his biological father had been in that space the whole time. But, Rick had said, I was young. I didn't know.
Yep.
Uh, I don't know. I don't know if people may have wanted him to dig deeper or investigate, but there's so many unknowns there.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it was, but once it was confirmed that Rick was his father, and just the whole emotional scene of Kirk Franklin passing him, taking and passing him here,
Mhm.
and him just, I love the openness, the vulnerability of his father showing emotion, and Kirk Franklin being honest, be like, "Come here, man, come here, come here." That whole scene,
Yeah.
amazing. He knew and I was sitting, when I first watched it, I told you I was on the elliptical, and I was like, I was chanting, I was like, hug, 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 hug. And so, and so when I cannot imagine the psychological and the emotional release. It was such a God moment too,
Mhm.
when they were able to hug, embrace, and cry. Let me just say that:
Mhm.
hug, embrace, and cry
Cry. Two
as
grown men
two grown men, as
on
men
camera.
on camp. Oh, I love it.
Two
On,
black men
I didn't think
on
about
camera
two black men. Yes,
hugging,
hugging, crying, being
expressing
open.
emotion.
Yep, with
No,
both of them realizing that, hey, this is my real father and this is my real son.
yeah.
Wow.
And living this truth in front of the world.
Mm.
You know.
And something you mentioned earlier, Cliff. You said, and he mentioned it in the documentary. This has been a journey for him and will be a journey. And his words, he said, and many people have been posting and reposting this phrase and this statement, which I love. um, who am I well? Because I've only known me broken.
Mm,
Just-
mm,
I mean, what a profound, powerful, phrase and statement. And that's something that trauma can do to people a lot of times if they never get it dealt with or addressed. Like we said, we know he has a therapist.
right.
He looks like also he has a growing group, a community of people who are supporting him. So trauma needs to be treated. So if you're tuning in, if you're watching the broadcast later, the replay, and there's been some traumatic stuff that you have dealt with, going through, etc., your trauma does need to be addressed. It's not gonna magically disappear.
Right.
You um you do want to work through it. You want to deal with it, because trauma is real and it will have a effect and impact on you. Yeah.
It does. And from the effects of not feeling safe in your own body, from not knowing who you are, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Uh,
Thank
from
you, Donald Butler.
from having this, because you think about him, right? How many of us, personally, I've listened to some of his songs that got me through horrific times in life. Where I felt alone, where I felt broken, and I felt like things weren't going to work out for me. And this man sitting here saying, I've only known myself broken. I've not known myself well. You know, that's that part of the journey for him.
Yep.
Because we often talk to, I know oftentimes when I talk to clients, I talk about things that they consider normal that actually aren't normal. They just been normalized because that's been their experience, or that may be some of the things they use to survive or to numb themselves or guard themselves from pain or emotions, as grass to internally, emotionally, mentally, and physically feel safe. You know what I mean? So we think these things are normal, but they've actually been normalized. Oftentimes trauma gets you to normalize things that really aren't normal. You know,
Yeah.
for instance, let's say you grew up in a home and you saw domestic violence
Mm.
from your earliest childhood memory to you eventually leave the home, right?
Hmm.
Where somebody else may hear about that and be devastated. And they're like, oh, how could you sit there and let that happen or whatever? Or, but for you, it could be like, I don't know, that's kind of how relationships are. I've kind of seen some of that. So, you know, that can become a normalized thing to you, but it is not the normal way or healthy way to do relationships,
It's
but
not.
it can become normalized. Certain things I learned in a segment of time when I lived in Philadelphia that became, normalized to me, but weren't normal,
No.
you know.
Nope.
So a lot of times when you start to identify that these things aren't normal, but they've been normalized, it can throw you off, and you have to go through that journey
You do.
because you might be like, this is the way I should react to things. This is how I should deal with things. But then you're like, oh, so what you're telling me is that's not how I that's not how I should respond to this.
Yep.
This isn't how I should react to it.
Yep. And Dr. Watson put creating space to unlearn brokenness, right?
Mhm.
And internalize wellness, yes. And making choices to turn from familiar chaos is life changing. That's the healing work. Good. And what I'll add to that is he has a one-to-one therapist. So he's working through some things with the therapist as far as his healing work and healing journey. He's a community. It looks like he has a community of people that he can connect with. What I also like is that there's two aspects of what I want to touch base with before time escapes us. And one is, his mother has this pervasive pattern of lying. She lies even after the second confirmation of the DNA test, which makes
Right.
absolutely no sense whatsoever. But he's clear at that point part of his work is that he has to set appropriate limits and boundaries with her so
Mhm.
that she does not continue to traumatize him. So he's aware that, because if we look at the documentary, his mother would be considered, if we put it into like a storybook form, his mother would be considered like the villain here, right?
Mhm.
And so, which she also needs some of her own help, healing, deliverance. Healing and deliverance is available for everybody, right? Who
Yes.
experiences trauma. And we see all throughout the documentary, like you said, we see the hand of God working with him early. We see God's involvement with him through his music. There's levels of healing he will get from writing, from singing, etc. But he's tapping into healing in a number of modalities, which is really great. But he's clear is the reality of what she cannot give him. He was looking for affirmation from
Mhm.
her, and for whatever is going on within her, whatever dysfunction which is going on with her, he's not going to get it. So he's clear he has to set those limits and boundaries.
Yes,
And
sir.
then the other thing you mentioned earlier, oh my goodness, his son, his son, we saw years ago. I think he mentioned it was 2 years
It's
ago.
2 years ago. Mhm.
The world saw a few years ago the great Kirk Franklin, because he is great. We saw a breakdown in the relationship between him and his biological son. Things got kind of hostile, volatile. But we also saw through the documentary as he started to share with his son that, hey, you have a grandfather,
Mhm.
and I know who he is now. We saw the emotional release and the change and the passion of reconciliation starting to happen between
Mhm.
him and his son, right? We started seeing levels of healing, and the point Kirk Franklin said, yeah, I know we, him and his son, have some work to do, have a journey to do. So, so that part was that parallel process of the challenge with his own son, the themes of demonstrated themes of forgiveness, themes of grace and reconciliation. Um, that the healing journey can happen all sorts of ways.
Mhm.
Yeah, all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
He was he was broken from a lack. Kirk Franklin was broken from a lack of father-son relationship with his son. How would he know how to be a good father to his son?
Right. Who modeled that for him?
I don't
You
know.
know, who modeled it for him? But also, and that's the thing, like our world today, right? We get sound bites. So
Mm.
we get a portion of a recorded conversation, right?
Oh.
We don't get the whole context. The portion we hear him talking in a way which, most people wouldn't expect to hear him show up, right? And it goes viral. And he talks about how that relationship had been fractured for years. And we just saw a small part of it. And we saw, you know, not to right or wrong it, but we saw the humanness, in him. Think about it. You know what I mean?
Oh, comment. Good comment, Kojo Wilson. I don't know. Would we have gotten the Kirk Franklin we know
Hmm.
if he had not been so traumatized by this scenario?
Hmm.
Oh, oh. How much time? How many-
that's that's a part two question, isn't
I love it. I love it. Oh, I don't. I honestly don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm gonna hinge on maybe not.
it?
Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what his life would have looked like depending. It depending because, for example, some people have a biological father in their life, but they're not a good father.
Right.
They're not a helpful father. They're a hurtful father. They're
Right.
not an inspiring, supportive dad, like you are, Cliff, to your son. I can tell.
Yeah.
But that's not the case everywhere. Sons, excuse me. That's
Right.
not the case everywhere. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Uh, yeah, we don't know because we don't know. We know a lot of his music does come from his heart, his pain, and that music is very therapeutic for him.
Hmm.
So we definitely,
Yes.
I kind of lean like you. We would get a different version of him because you think about like parts work, right, Dia?
Yep.
Parts work, internal family systems work. You have all these different parts of you that make up your whole. You know, so it's like those things that he went through did create a part of him that we see
Mm.
that we would not have seen if he didn't have those experiences. you know and even with his mother, oftentimes when I look at trauma, how we respond and how we deal with things traumatically, and how we you know being triggered lends so much to that part of your brain that does go with emotions and sensations and feelings. Oftentimes what people use to cultivate safety within themselves in their relationships cause pain to others.
Mm.
Because when you're looking at his mother, her having two confirmed DNA tests that's his father, and still saying, I don't know, that's not your father. It's not your father. And not moving from that. There there's something in her that she's using that to not allow her to move forward. You know what I mean? Well, maybe that narrative within creates safety in her, but we see the damage it's doing, you know, to him.
We do.
So it's like a lot of times what we use for safety can be harmful or create a lack of safety in those we're connected to and we have relationships with. Because we use certain things, you know, to soothe us or to get us through or to numb the pain. But those connected to you and that you have attachments with, where you're grasping at safety, you could be damaging them
Yeah.
from that.
Yep. And so here we have Kirk Franklin, this award winning gospel artist. Great, great, great in all that he does. Music and ministering and writing and directing and orchestrating and singing. And we all been blessed mightily. But and he has God in his relationship. But he also has trauma,
Mhm.
early childhood trauma that you know his going his is good stuff, but him going to church, him praying and writing and singing, it's not going to resolve all of that trauma. He realized he needed a therapist. He needed to work through it. He needed to deal with it. He needed to confront things, confront people. He needs to make some structural changes in his life. He needs to learn how to cope. He needs to set limits and boundaries. There's work for him to do. It taps into the faith without works is dead.
Mhm.
But he is on the pathway. He's on his journey to healing. We are almost out of time for today, but before we wrap up, I'm going to ask our guests to give us 1 to 2 minutes of parting words, closing statements, reflections, or thoughts before in a minute or so. Let me
Yes, sir.
somebody looks like they snuck in a little comment. Kirk Franklin was Coach Wilson. Kirk was fortunate to walk into within his biological father didn't need him financially. True. This
Mm.
fact alone allows the healing process. I love that.
Mhm.
Allows the healing process to occur naturally. It also allows the father to give Kirk what he needed from him for so long. That part is so key. I love it. Excellent.
That's an excellent point.
I never even thought about that. His fault. He didn't approach Kirk like, you're great. Give me some
Yeah,
bang.
hey Kurt, give me some money.
Good. That's true. That is
That
good.
is true. He's in a space. Also, him saying, we're gonna do it at your pace.
Oh,
I'm not forcing anything,
absolutely.
you know. I'm not forcing anything. I'm gonna go at your pace. Communicating with his grandson, basically saying the same thing. It's at you guys' pace. I'm
Absolutely.
here, I'm available. That's powerful because you want to process it in bite-sized steps. So in a quick minute, this one thing is what I would say. For those that are listening, you know, what's happened to you most of the time, it's not because of us. A lot of the traumatic experiences we have, it's not us. It's what others have done, or it's the experiences we've had. But you can heal, you
Mm,
know. You can heal. So if you take anything from this, I hope seeing that documentary and hearing our words inspires you to be courageous, because anybody that enters into the therapy space, I tell them they're courageous.
absolutely.
Anybody, because you're coming in and you are unpacking you.
Mm,
You're learning about you. You're focusing on you, you know, and you're on your journey. So I hope this inspires you to be courageous and to know that you're not strange, you're not crazy, uh, you're not beyond help, but healing is available for you. And that your trauma doesn't tell you who you are,
mm,
even if it's giving you a picture of who you may think you are. It doesn't have the power to completely dictate to you for the rest of your life that this is who you are. You have that ability. Oftentimes, you just need to be inspired and you need those safe spaces to heal and to grow and to enter back in the wholeness. Because there is a part of you that's lost when you experience these things. But know there are people out here willing to help and support you.
thank you, sir.
Yes,
Appreciate
sir.
I appreciate that. Let me see. There we go. So, we want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight to the relaunch of an integrated approach. You'll be able to join us here every first Sunday at 6 p.m. every first Sunday on our Facebook page, Dion Brown, and our YouTube channel, DMV Therapist. Please also let others know about this. This was entitled Trauma, Mental Health, and Spirituality, referencing the Kirk Franklin documentary. So others will be able to go on to our YouTube page, DMV Therapist, as well as our regular Facebook page, Dion Brown, to see the replay. If you would like to follow us, you can follow us on Instagram here at the self care underscore therapist. And we have a self care therapist Facebook page, which you can follow us as well. If you would like to find out more information about us, what we do, the integration of mental health and spirituality, book us. If you're a church or ministry and would like to book us to come speak, do a weekend ministry clinic for men, youth, and church leaders, you can go to our website and look under our spirituality category, complete our booking form, send us an email, etc., etc. We are so grateful that you are here with us. And of course, if you would like to support our efforts, you can support us this way as well. We are grateful for everybody that's taken the time to be with us. For our guests,
Yes,
uh,
sir.
Brother Cliff, it's been amazing as usual. So, very moving and powerful discussion. So, we are grateful and thankful that you've taken the time, effort, and energy to be with us. And you know, we definitely will have you back sometime later in the future on an integrated approach. But we just wanted to thank you, and we're gonna have you stay around for a moment as we dismiss with
Yes,
our
sir.
audience. We want to thank all of you for tuning in, and remember to share this with someone else, so somebody else can learn from this trauma, who is on their pathway to hope, healing, restoration. You can be healed no matter where you are, no matter what stage you are. You can receive healing. Everyone, have a good evening and take care.